Amendment number 30, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Flores of Texas.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to offer my amendment, which would address another misguided federal regulation. Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act prohibits federal agencies from entering into contracts for the procurement of alternative fuels unless their life cycle greenhouse gas emissions are less than or equal to emissions from an equivalent conventional fuel produced from conventional petroleum sources. Simply stated, my amendment would stop the government from enforcing this ban on the Department of Defense. The initial purpose of Section 526 was to stifle the Defense Department's plans to buy and develop coal-based or coal-to-liquids jet fuels. This section was based on the opinion of environmentalists that coal-based jet fuel produces more greenhouse gas emissions than traditional petroleum. I recently offered my similar amendment to both the Milcon VA and Ag Appropriations bills, and they passed the House by voice vote each time. My friend Mr. Conaway of Texas also had similar language added to the Defense Authorization Bill to exempt the Defense Department from this burdensome regulation. We must ensure that our military becomes more energy independent and that it can effectively and efficiently rely on domestic and more stable sources of fuel. Our nation's military should not be burdened with wasting its time studying fuel emissions when there is a simple fix: not restricting their fuel choices based on extreme environmental views, policies, and regulations like Section 526. In light of increasing competition with other countries for energy and fuel resources and continued volatility and instability in the Middle East, it is more important than ever for our country to become more energy independent and to further develop and produce our domestic energy resources. Placing limits on federal agencies, particularly the Defense Department's fuel choices, is an unacceptable precedent to set in regard to America's energy policy and independence. On July 9, 2008, the Pentagon, in a letter to Senator James Inhofe, stated, and I quote, "Such a decision would cause significant harm to the readiness of the armed forces because these fuels may be widely used and particularly important in certain geographic areas." In summary, not only have extreme environmental views and policies created a burden to American families and businesses, but they also cause, quote, "significant harm and readiness to the armed forces," unquote. Mr. Chairman, Section 526 makes our nation more dependent on Middle Eastern oil. Stopping the impact of Section 526 would help us promote American energy, improve the American economy, and create American jobs. To everyone watching these proceedings today, I would say this: following my remarks, you will hear speakers from the other side of the aisle make several claims regarding the merits of Section 526. When you hear these claims, please remember the following facts about Section 526. It increases our reliance on Middle Eastern oil. It hurts our military readiness and our national security. It prevents the use of safe, clean, and efficient North American oil and gas. It increases the cost of American food and energy. It's American jobs in the American economy. I urge my colleagues to support passage of this common sense amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Mr. Speaker, I join my colleague in asking to exempt the Department of Defense from Section 526. 526 was added to the energy bill in a wrong-headed move to placate some notion that it would have some impact on global warming. It's wrong to require the Department of Defense in these times where every single dollar is scarce and every single dollar should have a home, to require them to spend extra money beyond what they would normally spend for fuel for their planes. This amendment would also allow continued development of coal-to-liquid jet fuel, which would make this country much less dependent on foreign oil in terms of powering our jets and other engines. So 526 maybe it belongs in the Department of Energy bill, maybe it belongs somewhere else, but it does not belong in the Department of Defense spending bill, because those dollars are scarce. They're going to get scarcer. And to require the Department of Defense to spend more money than they would have otherwise spent on energy under this wrong-headed notion, in my view, is just simply bad policy. So I rise in support of my colleague's amendment and urge the adoption of his amendment when it comes to vote. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Thank you for the chance to provide further weight to this amendment. It's important to know that much of the oil that we import from the oil sands in Canada winds up being blended in several refined fuels throughout the United States. So if you took a literal reading of Section 526, theoretically the military would not be able to use any of those fuels, since the oil sands as a source is considered to be banned by Section 526. The oil from Canada, from the oil sands, is stable North American oil and gas, and it is in large part produced by Americans and creating American jobs. And Section 526 would cut off this safe, friendly, stable source of fuel to this country. And my amendment does nothing to restrict the military from looking at all alternative sources of fuel. It allows them to go with biofuels, whatever alternative energy sources they need. It just takes away burdensome restrictions that are based on environmental views that aren't proven. I yield back.
And Mr. Chairman,